What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson, here with my co-host, Julia Gladhill. What is good?
It's all right. How are you?
I've not been that great, actually. Not sleeping well.
neither.
Yeah.
Me neither. Yesterday, my therapist told me I looked bad, and I was like, "Are you allowed to say that?"
It's like, do you like repeat business? Like what? Interesting. Yeah. Vibes are
I'm not
off
gonna
right
dwell
now.
on it.
No. I mean, we're in a pretty emergency situation. I don't know the extent to which it's going to come up in the episode, but I mean, there's like literally a war on unions, Department of Labor, education, federal workers, anybody who is like a skilled worker, technocratic, highly educated, but maybe is not rich from owning land assets and family wealth. All those people are getting fucking soaked. I mean, like that's the Project 2025 is basically like trying to kill the idea of a middle class, which is not great. Starting with federal workers. So
Yep.
you're on ground zero in a way.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of friends impacted by the Doge closures. So yeah, people are unemployed. It's cold,
Are they doing protests or like are they just freaking out? I mean, what's
Yeah. Like there was a big showing of USAID employees. I want to say last week. Time is a blur. Honestly, the first month of this year was insane. I sort of can't believe it. Feels like we're halfway through the year or something. It's been quite a marathon ever since the holidays, really. But yeah, I mean, federal employees are showing up, at agencies trying to get inside and ask questions. And, there have been some members of Congress that show up to those types of events too. And there are sort of unnamed, unofficial Doge employees, some of which we've seen reported about in the press, usually quite young people. And I think it was Noah Colwyn of Blowback that said this on Twitter. But it's telling when you have like 22-year-olds sort of doing this work and prohibiting people from entering buildings because the sort of more practiced and experienced employees, if there are folks like that at Doge, might not be willing to do that kind of work. And I think it's really true when you have and I say that as a 20 something myself, that if those young
mature 20 something
are I'm officially in my later, I'm 27, I'm in my later 20s at this point, proudly and happily. I don't miss being 22. But it says something, it says something when you have the youngsters sort of doing that kind of work because it's thankless and it can probably color the rest of your career, depending on how things shake out.
Yeah. I mean, we have the list now. I wrote about this the other day, but it's like the Doge boy staffers, and Doge girl staffers, like we know who they are, that means they can be held to account in the same way. Like these people should be sued. These people are breaking the law. Like it's not Doge as a mythical entity. It's actual human beings who are associated with this label Doge, But I don't know. We'll get into this later, but America's less of a democracy than people think and officially not actually a democracy, which means you can't count on the law to save you. But we'll get to that. So right before jumping on this, I saw that Darren Beatty, who Trump nominated as the acting Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, that he's out basically before he even really got into place. And what's remarkable about that is he's a white nationalist who has said some pretty nasty things about women and black folks, as white nationalists do. And none of that was disqualifying. Okay. That was like priced in to his nomination. What was disqualifying was that he said a couple years ago that we should basically trade Taiwan to China in exchange for something or anything because China was inevitably going to be the hegemon of Asia. That was disqualifying. When that came out, that was like, whoa, dude. It's one thing to hate women. It's one thing to hate black people, to talk about white pride. It's another thing to short circuit World War III.
Yeah, wow. No, I hadn't seen that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's nuts. What's kind of funny though is like all these things that are known about him because of his social media activity, which is
Mhm.
like this is our enduring paper trail, for better and worse, mostly probably for worse. It's like,
Yep, yep.
um,
Yeah, it's a little scary to have your whole life and potentially your career on the internet. It certainly freaks me out.
yeah, yeah. There was a period as like elder millennial that a bunch of like my whole generation was waffling between like, this is going to fuck up our careers if we're so public about things, and so we should not be online basically as much as possible. And like some people did go that way, like people in the federal workforce, but for the most
Mhm.
part it was just like, dude, it's you can't resist, like this is
No.
just part of the terrain. um okay, well, the real show. So I've got a clip here that is kind of profound on foreign policy. It's definitely a big shift. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, made this public press conference statement about the Trump administration's positioning on Ukraine, which is immediately going to be very different. Let me just share the 30-second clip and then we can wax about it.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European.
If you're going to have an imperialist foreign policy, which Trump has, you can't really go around stopping other empires from doing imperialisms, and I think that's my like shorthand way of like simultaneously saying like this is a good position to take in the sense that it is realistic, but
Mhm.
my larger concern is that like everybody has like unleashed their opinions about this kind of based on their priors. I'm not necessarily different in that respect, but
Yeah.
the people who are favorable toward this, there's a little bit of like restraint washing going on where it's like this is realistic. This is not realism. Like the reasoning by which they arrived at this position of like no Ukraine in NATO, the pre-2014 borders are not coming back. Like, yeah, like the power realities dictated that. I've said that since from the beginning, which is why I don't talk about Ukraine much because that was like a wildly unpopular position to take this whole time.
Mhm.
Um, but like to say that it's realistic is not to say that they're like thinking about power politics clearly or whatever. Like they have this larger imperial project, and this is actually consistent with that, and the imperial project is problematic. But that doesn't mean, it's like the broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing.
Right. Right. No, I really like that. I like restraint washing as a term to apply to the Trump administration. I think there's a few things that we can talk about today that would fall under that umbrella. And it's difficult from, a restraint standpoint to celebrate things that are said when the whys can differ in a really significant way. And like Trump has been talking about Europe and burden sharing for a really long time. And, if they actually care about that, they need to walk the walk, right? And that's
Mhm.
sort of where I am kind of holding my breath to see if that actually happens. Because Trump will say one thing and then go do the exact opposite. And so I want to acknowledge good intentions or at least stated intentions for what they are without giving too much credit because it is like not because Trump is doing a lot of sort of realistic thinking about like what is actually viable and like what the sort of strategic goal or purpose of, continued US military support has been, acknowledging that like obviously it's terrible, like nobody wants this to be the case.
Yeah.
But no, it is definitely restraint washing, and it's something that I personally definitely struggled with, especially in writing about like transparency around Ukraine aid specifically.
I mean, we talked before Trump came to power again. This is actually one of the perfect examples that we were sort of thinking out loud about how to deal with, which is like, this is something we very much sort of either want or think is inevitable, but it's not happening for those reasons that we thought, and so as we look on at it or narrate it or whatever, we don't want to attribute our reasons to his reasons,
Right.
because we're not going to be, I mean, we're legitimating him at that point, but also like we're going to be missing the sort of imperialism that happens elsewhere because we wouldn't expect it if we were thinking in a realist lens or something.
And like these things can change on a dime. I mean, Trump typically goes with like whatever the last person who spoke to him said, and like that is most compelling to him. And so it's like with Ukraine, I mean, it could, who knows, like it could sort of play out in a similar resource grounds that like Syria did during his first Trump administration with Zelensky, like appealing to, the Trump administration in the United States writ large on like critical minerals, like they have lithium or whatever. Like, so yeah, I mean, it's encouraging in some ways, but I do definitely think that it is sort of restraint washing when we sort of give too much credit when that sort of why is never really explained, at least not by the likes of Hegseth.
Yeah, if you're Europe, I mean, first of all, it's not like this wasn't foreshadowed, like this was like the thing that separated MAGA from like traditional Republicans, like this was the main fissure. So like you knew this was coming, but like if you're Europe and you've willingly had your head in the ground about that for a long time, and now the US is staking out a position that is directly contrary to what you have said is like vital for your European interests or whatever. Like, what's the point of having America? I'm sure that Europhiles will come up with some reasons, but like, I'm trying to think about what's the benefit of having America inside your tent, because you literally cannot rely on them. The fact of having this alliance architecture with America at its center means that like America is going to put the screws on you, which is what America does to its allies when it's in sort of villain mode, and like and you're going to have to like literally you're going to have to rely on like self-help in the traditional security sense. And that's how you're going to have to act even with the US in NATO. So like, what's the upshot? You might as well de-align or whatever.
Totally. It's just a question of how do you pay for it, right? It's the same thing here, like the National Defense Strategy Commission last year saying we want these crazy military budget increases and sort of alluding to the fact that you have to cut entitlements and some kind of like level of mandatory spending, but not really delineating how, because that would be terribly unpopular as it would be in Europe. So yeah, I mean, like, no, I completely agree. Things change every 4 years. The United States can't really be trusted. There's very little consistency. So from a European standpoint, like, I'm no Europe expert, but yeah, there's totally a strong case for autonomy. And it's like just a question of figuring out how you pay for it, which is exactly the same dilemma that the budget boosters face here, and yet are so good at avoiding in the press. It's actually insane.
Yeah. I mean, this is the importance of like the strategic imagination, though. Like the budget for compensating for losing the US or whatever, in terms of like how you think about your national defense or continental defense, like that's, if you're just holding all the old assumptions in place, like, yeah, that's a costly thing to have to offset. But this is where like concepts of non-offensive defense come in, or like reframing how we think about security literally, so that like it's not in this lose-lose spiral of like deterrence by my flag against aggression of your flag, or like we need this maximalist zero-sum shit. Like you can square the circle here and actually like come up with a budget document that has a strong theory of security in it, but it would require adopting a different set of assumptions and a different way of kind of relating to what, how we think about security. And like the Mike McFalls of the world, no shade, have been spending the last 40 years of their lives making sure that we don't think that way or don't even entertain alternative ways of thinking about this stuff. And I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Like I have no idea how that looks like in Europe, but I certainly hope that they figure it out, because I don't think that we should be trusted the United States. And it would be better for everyone to sort of move toward a more autonomous conception of security, defense, and otherwise.
Yeah. I'm very, I don't have my coherent thoughts yet about how to critique this precisely, but like America's allies are a huge problem in sort of propping up a kind of romantic version of what America is. And it's by doing that, it's actually facilitating an expanding American imperialism globally, which is going to cost a lot of lives, violates everything that the allies think they stand for. And it's like, they see what's happening and they're not updating. It's like this in Asia too, especially. So I don't know. I need to like formulate how to critique this precisely, because it's a problem. But speaking of budgets, you had some budget reconciliation. I mean, try to explain this shit in a way that like, because like 40% of our audience is like overseas, but there's a lot going on here. Budget reconciliation and defense increases.
Yes. I am cognizant of the fact that many listeners are not based in the United States and are much less interested in the goings-on in the halls of the U.S. Congress.
Except that it fucking matters to them too,
Yeah. So, I mean, like, this is where I focus my energy and where I've spent most of my professional life, is following Congress in the budget process and the defense policy making process. So yeah, I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, the budget reconciliation process, which basically enables lawmakers to pass a budget without a supermajority. So because Republicans have such a slim majority in both chambers, particularly in the Senate, they are pursuing this budget reconciliation process so that they can increase spending with a simple majority vote, so that they can avoid the filibuster. And, they don't have the votes for a supermajority vote, which would be the regular budget process. And the reason I brought this up again is because this is sort of a major priority for those of us focused on Pentagon spending oversight. The Freedom Caucus proposed like $300 billion in security, quote unquote, security and border spending for this package that they're pushing through Congress. This has all sort of coalesced this week in two different packages from the House and the Senate. So the House is pushing a reconciliation package to increase military spending by $100 billion in some time frame in the next decade. They sort of delineate through like 2034 what these increases will look like. That also includes this House package, reconciliation package, also includes cutting $2 trillion in spending as sort of proposed by Doge and then kind of also rolled back by Musk. The package also includes $2.5 trillion in tax cuts, and they're increasing the debt ceiling by $4 trillion. And they're pursuing, one big legislative package to do all of this stuff. So I just want to sort of like note, this is a massive increase in military spending on top of increases already projected by the Congressional Budget Office. Like there are already expected increases to the tune of like $9 trillion over the course of like the next decade. And so what's a few $100 billion more, So the Senate has another reconciliation package that's like $150 billion. I won't like go too deep into the details, but obviously these are massive military spending increases that are really moving through a pretty anti-democratic democratic process. And I say that knowing that reconciliation is also the process through which, the Affordable Care Act was passed.
This is a way of beating Senate filibusters. So Democrats cannot stop this, basically.
Yes, exactly. Like you only need a 51 majority, right? A simple majority to get through reconciliation rather than 60 something. So yeah, that's the top line is reconciliation is a way to do really big things with the budget without regular order and avoiding the filibuster in the Senate. And I think it also speaks to sort of the restraint washing that's happening for a lot of Trump administration officials, because you see just a few minutes before we hit record, I saw, an Associated Press article that President Trump said that he wants to pursue massive military budget cuts and arms control agreements with Russia and China. And it's like he says one thing and does the exact opposite. He said this during his first administration as well. You can't say that you want to move toward, cutting nuclear modernization costs, and then also, sort of implicitly supporting your own party's efforts to massively increase the military budget. It's actually counter to your project if you are saying one thing and doing the exact opposite.
He hired all the wrong people if what he wants to do is cut the defense budget. He hired all the wrong people.
But he's very effective at dominating the news cycle with things that are popular
and not true.
And then not true, and letting the exact opposite move forward. So you have a president who is saying he wants to move toward, cutting the nuclear arsenal. He literally says, he's quoted saying, we could blow up the world like 50 times over. Why are we, I don't know if he uses the term overkill, but, he's like, why are we spending all this money on nuclear modernization? And yet his party is pursuing hundreds of billions of dollars of increases in military spending, part of which is to support the nuclear modernization effort, which is, mainly justified by China threat inflation, the two-peer nuclear environment. This is all part of the sort of great power competition lens that DC is adopting and that the Trump administration has adopted in many ways.
Sounds like a rivalry peril to me.
I don't think that Americans can even count on the entirety of the Democratic Party to vote against these national security.
That's what I was going to raise. Yeah.
And that's like really striking because like, regardless of your sort of ideological stance, like one would think that the Democratic Party would be against, massive increases to the budget at the cost of sort of social needs. That can't even be said. I don't think that sort of the space is hopeful that every Democrat in each chamber is going to do that. And usually, you have the Democratic Party oppose military spending increases on the basis that, there is no parity for non-defense spending. But that, I don't think that can even be expected, which is not terribly surprising, right? Because, military spending in war is bipartisan as can be. It always has been. But that's what's so wild about this is that if the Democratic Party really wanted to, I mean, everybody could vote in totally together against reconciliation packages. And in theory would only have to peel off a few Republicans, which, you have Rand Paul who's saying that he won't vote for a reconciliation package without sort of requisite spending cuts, to sort of balance the budget, balance the debt. So that's a really interesting sort of political dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, this is the reason you don't hear about any of this stuff, certainly internationally, but even outside the halls of Politico.com, is because fucking the Democrats don't have a very strong ability to actually critique these massive inflations to the defense budget. They don't, because that would
support them.
That would require embracing an anti-war critique of U.S. foreign policy, which they do not fucking do. So this is they can't even call out Trump on his hot lies about arms control and wanting to reduce nukes and reduce defense spending. They can't critique him on that because that would mean they would have to embrace doing those things. If they were the actual standard bearers for arms control, for disarmament, for nuclear reductions, for defense budget cuts, if they owned those issues, they could critique Trump and be like, he's full of shit and here's why. But they can't do that because they support whatever fucking Republicans want to do. They just want to tweak some shit on the margins.
Yeah. Yeah. And they, they concede. I mean, the nuclear modernization effort kind of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the Obama administration kind of sparked the modernization effort, like as we see it today, because John Kyle, basically, when he was Republican whip, former senator from Arizona, basically held Senate support for the like 2010 ratification of the New START treaty hostage, unless the Obama administration agreed to spend, it was like $80 billion or something on nuclear modernization. And what's wild about that is that prior to 2010, there were, as I understand it, serious conversations about moving down to like even a dyad, for a number of reasons. And it's like in such a short period of time, we have found ourselves in an entirely different environment where, you know, maybe the president just said that we shouldn't be pursuing nuclear modernization at the scale and scope that we are. But it's rolling. Like it's happening. The Pentagon certified continuation of the Sentinel program after an 81% cost increase since 2020. But it really hasn't been that long. It's been 14 years.
And we don't need it. We don't fucking need it. It doesn't do anything for us.
No, we don't. And it's interesting because it's like if Trump says that in the press and then, you know, his party pushes through a reconciliation package to add $100-something billion to the military budget in part to do nuclear modernization, I mean, I don't think he really cares about anything, but it's so interesting that he would allow sort of like a big news story around him saying, why would we need any more nuclear weapons? And then just let it happen.
Tupac said, they got money for wars, but can't feed the poor.
You know what's funny, when it rains, it pours. They got money for wars, but can't feed the poor.
That was in the fucking early 90s. And it's the same, like, that shit ain't changed. I mean, it's the Republican ideology in some ways, but Democrats are like very complicit in it. It's just totally this, we do militarism as foreign policy. And that's the justification for austerity at home. And so if you have a politics that requires austerity at home and tax cuts for the rich, how are you politically going to justify that and sell that? You can only justify that and sell that by doing militarism and then claiming that it's national security and it's a must do, you know? So we geopolitics wash austerity for the rest of us. And we call it national security, you know, and like, I mean, we have a chat in The Rivalry Peril, not to hawk the book again, but like we have a chapter about how geopolitical competition actually destroys economic democracy. And it hangs on this Tupac insight. I don't quote Tupac, but like it's really that like there is a politics of guns versus butter that has been concocted in American politics. And so by doing the guns, we have opted into a process of starving us of butter. You know, that's the sort of the gist. And then showing how and why that works is like the legwork of doing the book. But like, man, Tupac said it first.
Yeah, actually, since you brought up Tupac in the 90s, I know you want to talk about like mercenaries, but I think that this is a really good transition to acquisition reform, which I know many listeners won't care about, and I'm going to make the case for why you should. But okay, so talking about the 90s, the 90s were like one of the only periods that we see actually a dip in U.S. military spending because of the so-called peace dividend, because the Cold War was over and the Clinton administration was like, yo, we did it. We're the superpower. We're chilling. We're done. Like everything's going to be great. And then they realized, oh no, we have an arms industry that's like 50 plus contractors, and they're not going to be able to survive with these defense budget cuts, with these military budget cuts. Sorry, I'm trying to move away from defense because it's not defense. It's really actually quite offensive. And
call them the murder budget, the murder budget.
the murder budget. Well, yes. Or just the War Department. We could go back to that.
Yeah.
We could revisit the not second.
Hegseth would probably support that.
Yeah. He said that in his book. That's like one of two good things he said in his book. The other one was a 10-year cooling off period for generals entering the arms industry. But he did.
I'm not a general, am I?
Yeah, no, exactly. We talked about this. Yeah, in his hearing, Warren asked if he would make the same pledge, and he was like, he was so sassy with it. Like,
Yeah.
sir, please. But okay, acquisition reform. The reason this matters is because we had this military spending cut in the 90s. And then the Clinton administration was like, oh no, we have an arms industry and we need to protect their money, right? Like they are going to have to consolidate. This is like the whole Last Supper. The Clinton administration basically facilitated like massive consolidation of the arms industry, but simultaneously sort of designed and facilitated the beginnings of the so-called acquisition reform movement, which is essentially an effort to deregulate the weapon acquisition process within the Department of Defense, to empower corporations and expand their influence on defense policymaking.
Cool.
By that, I mean protect profits even as the arms industry drastically consolidated, because you got to be pro-business, right? Even after the end of the Cold War. And so in the like 30 plus, or 30 years since then, we have seen this continuation of an acquisition reform effort wherein industry and its spokespeople say, oh no, the Department of Defense is so cumbersome, and oh no, we can't keep pace with innovation or so-called great power competition, and therefore we need to deregulate. We need to gut the process so that DoD can just let industry innovate, and we can, sort of lead and maintain technological superiority and whatever. And that is now a major focus for the Senate Armed Services Committee this year, because the chair, Roger Wicker, who we love to talk about in terms of military spending increases, because he's sort of like one of the main proponents of the whole peace through strength, spend 5 to 7% of GDP on the military. And so what's really frustrating to me, and why I think listeners should care about this, is that you have a Congress that is now buying into all these security arguments under the veil of great power competition for deregulating weapon acquisition, so that we can adopt new technologies, again, at the pace of innovation or at the pace of a dynamic geopolitical environment. It is literally going to open the floodgates to unmitigated adoption of every shiny new thing that the military wants or that the arms industry sells them. And when you have a revolving door and you have corruption to the extent that is, I think, embodied by Elon Musk with his $400 million contract for SpaceX,
armored Tesla EVs.
Yeah, like what are we doing? What are we doing? Anyway, so like people, I care about the budget as a taxpayer and an American that cares about the threat of arms racing when the United States continues to, again, like do crazy things like build more nuclear weapons for some freaking reason. But the acquisition reform sort of process, the legislative process, like that is the mechanism through which lawmakers, if Wicker and others get their way, that's the mechanism through which they're going to increase military spending for generations of Americans. And it's going to be very hard to undo, and it's going to really mess up global stability and nuclear risk and all of those things. So rant over, but like, I know nobody cares about this, but it really matters. It really matters.
So like acquisition reform is this vague umbrella term that is like, its capaciousness makes it possible for lots of people to endorse it in principle, but
Yes.
like you have to, like the game is given away when a guy who thinks $1 trillion defense budget is not nearly enough is also an advocate of acquisition reform. Do you think acquisition reform is going to be a source of getting the Pentagon under control if the people advocating for it the loudest are the $2 trillion defense budget guys? Like obviously not, And so like there has always been this rhetorical shell game, even going back to like my time there in the Pentagon, where it's like sometimes acquisition reform is about, we need to centralize military service contracting so that individual services can't, like Air Force and Army and Marines can't just like do their own contracting. It should be like
jointness.
Yeah. Or sometimes it's about reducing this. This is the prototyping shit, like reduce the time it takes to introduce a contract for buying a weapon, because it takes too long. It's too hard. So let's speed that up. But
avoid the valley of death
just means money out the door even more quickly, and with less surety about whether it's good money after bad or whatever, or like, is this wise, So Or like Ro Khanna's thing, which I have mixed feelings about, honestly, break up the big five defense contractors, which in theory sounds fine, but I mean, I would support that for sure, actually. But
Yeah.
the subtext of it is like, let's give more contracts to the new defense industrial cartel, which is
Mhm.
the embodiment of evil, or to small contractors, which are largely like, I mean, maybe some of them are nice, but a lot of them are
No, they're not
grifters who
small in
came
the
out.
context of the arms industry even, like, it's a misnomer really, but
Yeah.
in theory, it's great. If you can increase competition, amazing. I have tried. I have tried for years, back when I was a lobbyist, like, I wrote several like, people do try every single year, and these amendments fail in the NDAA process, because the Rules Committee vetoes them, essentially, in the House, which is, like, sort of the whatever, it doesn't matter. They're the gatekeepers of deliberation over votes on the big defense policy bill. So if you can increase competition, that's amazing. But it's very hard to do, for obvious reasons of corporate influence and lobbying and campaign finance and all of those things. I have argued, albeit only once, I think, for nationalizing parts of the defense industry, if not all of it. I know it's not popular. Many people probably would not get on board with that. But I sort of just feel like it's time to try something new. I mean, I will still continue to sort of try to hold military contractors accountable and like make this process more reasonable by actually building up government capacity to negotiate good deals. But I think part of that is also like a narrative challenge where it's just so ingrained in the American psyche that private industry is more efficient or more innovative, when in fact, particularly in military technology, or even in tech writ large,
It's not true. I mean,
it's not true. Silicon
that's
Valley
the
wouldn't
deep
exist
seek problem. The
without
deep seek AI problem is like kind of evidence of that in a way,
Yeah. Because
Um,
why? Because startups, because venture capital, they make decisions based on their ability to make money, and that means that they're actually quite risk averse. Like the government takes on a lot of the risk of funding basic research that
Yeah.
then tech firms or whatever, sort of capitalize on. Like they do the applied stuff, they make it pretty for consumers before going to market, as did Tesla, as did Apple. And they reap the financial returns, and the venture capital is the same thing. They come in on the backs of taxpayer funded research, and then they dip after the IPO. It's sort of, I think one of the challenges is shaping like a new narrative wherein the government is actually actively forming markets, as opposed to quote unquote picking winners and losers. Like it's just not really true. The DARPA ARPA-E grants, Mariana Mazzucato has done a lot of really great work on this. She's an Italian economist who wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State, like after the financial crisis, that I think really applies to sort of where we're at today, where again, we're in a place where, the Trump administration and his acolytes are sort of pushing deregulation because of this idea of private industry being so innovative and efficient. And that just really fits into sort of like American conceptions of like business and entrepreneurship and like where good ideas come from. But government has always played a really big role in innovation. So anyway,
you can't socialize. This was a problem with the Inflation Reduction Act too, even though that's not defense. But it's like, if you're going to socialize the risk of state investment in the private sector, you ought not be privatizing the benefits. You should be socializing the benefits if you're socializing the risks. Otherwise, it's just corruption.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like it applies to so many industries, and like it's exacerbated by the fact that corporations are able to avoid taxes. Like not only are their products not like public goods, but the government doesn't even get returns in terms of taxes when you have companies that then like make subsidiaries in like sort of tax havens around the world. Apple's done this, right? Like in, I don't know, like Ireland and elsewhere. It's a major problem. But like, the government is the one who developed the basic research to do like to make touchscreens a thing, which is like the basis of like the iTouch and the iPhone, GPS, nanotech, biotech. Like there are examples in pharma, in tech, in the military industry. And I think that that's like a big sort of a narrative and like educational challenge where I don't think people know.
Imagine if Apple, with all of its innovation and largesse and wealth, imagine if that was like a public company, as in like a public utility, you know? Like
Yeah.
instead of just hoarding shit for like a couple guys at the top, like
Yeah. I'm
its
not saying
value
that
would still be immense, you know?
totally, totally. And I'm not saying that there isn't like, entrepreneurship and like innovation happening on the part of like the founders of these companies. Like obviously good work was done, but like there's like very little acknowledgement or awareness that the government provided the basic research to create the technologies that are really the foundation of companies like Apple and Tesla.
Yeah, this is fucked. Um,
It's very
it's all very
frustrating when
frustrating.
like
Yeah. Like the reason why for people listening or watching, the reason why like I know that Julia thinks this is important, but the reason why I've always thought it was important too is like this nerd shit about how you chop sake a fucking admin process to get to a budget document and use fucking acronym soup. That is the that is how militarism happens, and there is no demilitarization that happens without being able to like reverse engineer some of this stuff, or to be able
yeah.
to like go in and critique various aspects of the bowels of the process. So like everybody doesn't need to be a master of fucking acquisition alphabet soup, but you've got to know that like there's a million and one ways that this shit is rigged from the inside, and it's presented
Mhm.
to us as if it's just too arcane and also too legitimate to be questioned, you know. Because the outcome ultimately, to go another hip hop reference, Most Def had this song Mathematics in like 99. Okay. And the year matters. I think it was 99, because he said 69 billion in the last 20 years spent on national defense, but folks still live in fear.
Yeah.
69 billion is like what we give to an ally now to do a genocide. That's like not, you know, that's and that was 25 years ago. Like that's
Yeah.
not that long ago. And
Mhm.
that's what happens. You go from 69 billion being an egregiously large amount of disgusting militarism money to
Yeah.
now that's budget dust. And
Yeah.
how did we get there? How is 69 billion suddenly nothing? Because of these fucking insane processes, the corruption from the
And
inside.
you think about the budget for the Pentagon this year, it's $850 billion. In some ways, I think I've actually, I could do a better job of sort of putting this in the context of like national security spending writ large, which, like, yes, if you add in nuclear spending at the Department of Energy or like other defense related activities as the budget function describes, like you're at 895. But then if you also include national security stuff at the State Department, the like much of DHS, which I think I've said before, just like shouldn't exist. Its scope is far too broad. They like do fishery stuff and also border stuff. It's like crazy. Interest on the debt, like mandatory military spending or national security related spending
Fucking
on the state.
ICE. I mean, it goes like on
All
and
of it.
on. Yeah.
When you do that, and I added this up last year, it's like $2 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Monthly Review had a deep dive on the national security budget, and their estimate from 2022, I think, was at that point, they said it was $1.537 trillion. And
Yeah.
that figure has stuck out in my head because even at the time, the budget was at like 760 or something for defense.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, but that's a fucking shell game too, because that's a fraction of what's actually being spent on national security, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 1.7 for 2024.
Yeah. Well,
It's out of hand.
Yeah. Yes. And that may be a sign of democratic erosion, which may be a good next topic. America is officially not a democracy anymore. So the Center for Systemic Peace, they publish for political scientists, they publish one of the most used data sets in the field, tracking like regime type and quality of democracy or autocracy. So all these various political science journal articles that nobody reads except other scholars, all of that work is based on the manipulation of data sets. You like run regression analysis and all this shit. Well, you got to have data for that. Where's the data come from? They come from literally just a handful of data sets that are built by certain places. One of them, one of the premier ones, is this one. It's called polity, right? So they assign a polity score to every government to like track their degree of democracy or democratic backsliding or autocracy or whatever over time. And they have, they said in, what is it? the USA dropped below the democracy threshold on their polity scale in 2020, and they were considered an anocracy, which is to be like not a democracy, but not quite an autocracy either. Like you have attributes of both. That was where America's status was as of the end of 2020. And then in 2021, after the insurrection, it had returned to a democracy rating again. But then there were a series of things that have happened that we're all familiar with the Capitol insurrection, the Supreme Court, and then all this like the unlimited authority being granted to Trump, and the various like efforts to control facts in the US, and like the government pushing out disinformation to the public constantly. Like we can't trust our government anymore. All these various indicators that they have put us now into a situation where they say the US is officially no longer a democracy, and it lies at the cusp of autocracy. And we're primed. We're like, as a predictor, we are like blinking red that we're at risk of experiencing like some sort of cataclysmic instability, as in like a civil war or like an actual coup or something like that. And so that's where we're at. And this matters at a profound level because, like, in just like basic good strategy terms, you have to match your mode of doing politics to the situation that you exist in. This is like, otherwise you're not, facing reality. And so if America is an oligarchy, which has been established, it's not a democracy. It's at best an anocracy. And we've got clearly despotic features. We've got political scientists now who are saying that we're despotic at this point, and yet everybody, including most political scientists, have this ingrained habit of only mobilizing around elections. And that is totally incompatible with our regime type, right? I think electoralism has not really served American interests for a while now. Like it's not been working out well for us. But like the idea that you only mobilize politically because it's like you got to check a box on a ballot every few years, that's not the right mode of politics. The right mode of politics for emergency shit is civil disobedience and direct action. And we have not made that mindset shift, And if we don't make the mindset shift, it makes it that much easier for tyrants to consolidate power because they're counting on us to count on an election and nothing else to save us, or counting on us that the law is going to save us when the situation is otherwise. Or the Democratic Party, where fucking Hakeem Jeffries literally gave a speech saying there's nothing we can do.
Jesus, take the wheel. He literally said, we have God. It's like,
fuck you, guys.
God still reigns.
Man. All right.
I actually didn't know about that metric, which I'm a little.
This just came out like 24 hours ago.
But I didn't know about the polity thing in general at all. I'll be honest. But this is like kind of a like tangential question. But are you a Hamilton fan?
What?
The musical? Like Hamilton the musical?
Oh.
You're like, no, I hate musicals.
No. I mean, so like at the time when it was hot and everybody was onto it, I was like, oh, this is good. I watched it. It was, but
you watched it? Okay.
I'm very critical of it now, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the reason I never saw it, and I love musicals, I was a theater kid. The reason I never watched it is because I have this like long-standing antagonism for Hamilton because I was a JQA kid in college, which is how I like the field. And the Hamilton Society, as you well know, is sort of the alternative to the John Quincy Adams Society, which is all focused on bringing out the next generation of foreign policy leaders dedicated to realism and restraint. Well, the Hamilton Society's been around a lot longer, and I think was sort of an impetus for the John Quincy Adams Society to start and say, like, we need an alternative for young folks, college students, to sort of learn about foreign policy issues and international affairs.
It's like Bloods and Crips for nerds.
It is. And that's why I never got into Hamilton, because I was like, so if I was in graduate school, I would do some like media analysis of like popular culture's role in, moving American mindsets like toward a more complicit, like accepting state of like sort of what's going on with our democracy. Because Hamilton, like, I mean, in the Federalist Papers, like he was very much one who essentially wanted the presidency to like be a monarchy. Like he wanted us all to kiss the king's ring. And it's so interesting. Like I haven't really dived into Lin-Manuel Miranda at all because again, like I never watched the musical. I think we should pick a different founding father.
It's fucking over. Don't
but like it's interesting. Like why Hamilton? I don't know. I guess I would have to watch.
Do you know the back? Well, so you don't know the backstory of this? There was Ron Chernow or whatever, one of these airport bookstore guys, wrote a book that was a biography about Hamilton, and literally it was like at an airport bookstore. And Lin-Manuel Miranda stumbled on it, and Lin-Manuel, he's a very, capable, competent genius when it comes to creativity. He doesn't know fuck all about history or politics.
Did he not consult anybody, the Federalist Papers?
No,
even like, come on.
He literally found, he's retold this story many times. He found the book and he was like just reading it to kill time. And he was in this improvisational rap group basically at the time, which is actually a very impressive thing to do. And,
totally.
And like,
I would be scared.
Yeah, it's fucking hard. It's harder than freestyling. Like it. And, but anyways, like as he was reading it and just letting shit cook in his head, he was merging the idea of like his improvisational rap musical style with this history that to him was profound, that he had never seen before. And because he's growing up in like Crown Heights or whatever in Brooklyn, and he's in that environment, and so he's a creative, but at that era, it was like 2012, 2013 or whatever. It's all Obama magic, like American exceptionalism, patriotism, and all of that. And so like he was taking for granted that a founding father would be a good dude, and he had no critical capacity to think otherwise. So the next thing you know,
that's so wild to me. I guess he didn't know it was going to be a hit, but in his defense, but that is so wild to me. Like, gotta do ridiculous. Deep research before you start uplifting founding fathers.
Yeah. Where's the John Quincy Adams musical?
Please, we need one. We need one. Go not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. That would make a great song, I think.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of monsters to destroy, so America's imperialist foreign policy, I think, is on the verge of unleashing hell on Latin America, not for the first time. And I think this shit's going to be like, if I'm going to make a prediction, it would be like, we're about to see a kind of destabilization that could only really be eclipsed by World War III. Like we've talked about this before. I think people know Trump has these land grab ambitions everywhere, right? He's expansionist. Trump imperialist foreign policy. Panama Canal is target number one. Everyone knows the cartels in Mexico are this justification that the Trump administration is using to basically like do a war on terror, except redirected at Mexico specifically. And it's fucking insane to think that all of that will not create blowback in a much worse situation at the end of the day. But now there's like two pieces of news or whatever that suggest this Trump imperialism thesis is actually going to be like worse even than like a lot of left critics have been predicting. And so like the big change is, and there were signs this was going to happen in Trump 1.0, and it got overtaken by events. But Republican Congressman Tim Burchett is introducing the Cartel Mark and Reprisal Act Authorization Act of 2025, which is what it sounds like. It would authorize Trump to commission privately armed groups to seize people and property of any cartel member, or cartel-linked organization. That's dripping in imperialism. That's how European empires were built and functioned, like literally. Mercenaries doing swashbuckling adventure shit on behalf of the fucking crown, right? And we're going to turn an entire continent next door to us into an imperialist fantasy land where militiamen and soldiers of fortune can go and just like do cosplay of Sicario and Lioness, like rape and pillage, literally the pillage. this is not what I would call a restraint foreign policy. That's all I got to say.
To say the least. So this is crazy, first of all. But looking at the bill, what is especially wild to me is that it gives the president the authority to seize outside the geographic bounds of the United States and its territories, as you said, any person or property of any individual, and this is key, who the president determines is a member of a cartel. What does he know about anything? Like
it gets to be random. It's like with the Palestine protest, defunding NGOs and shit, taking away their status. Like,
yeah.
It's just, or like designated the like TikTok ban, which can apply to any social media platform that the president decides. This is unlimited power.
Yeah. Yeah. Full on constitutional crisis. Yep.
Fucking nuts.
Yep. That's where we're at.
This is, man. The other bit of news that was tied into this is less profound, but it's of a piece, which is Trump's special envoy to Latin America, Mauricio Claver Carone, which I can't say that as a white guy. I can only say it in like a Spanish accent, but I wouldn't know how to pronounce him. Politico asked him about Cuba, and then he said they're going to like escalate sanctions, of course. But then he said a bunch of wink and nod shit about implying that we're going to do like a Bay of Pigs or like exploding assassination cigar on Raul Castro. So he didn't explicitly say it, but he's like, oh, we've got creative ways. And the journalist was like, what do you mean creative ways of changing Cuba? And he's like, oh, we've got creative ways. Like he just kept saying that shit. And like, that's what Monroe Doctrine is, it's not benign. It's imperial. It's this rhetorical justification for like military operations and assassinations and coups and exploding cigars. And like, that's what it's been for most of American history. The like liberal hegemony shit, as down as I am on it, like it held us to a standard to not be so naked with the imperialism, and that's fucking out the window,
Yeah.
So.
No, it absolutely is. There I mean, in some ways it's like at least the Trump administration isn't even pretending to adhere to like classically liberal ideas. Like they just truly don't care.
No.
They just don't care at all.
For analysis and for punditry, though, this is kind of a mind fuck, because like if you're doing any of this stuff in the traditional way, or like talking about foreign policy in the traditional way, you're totally missing what's happening. Like this is transformative, So
yeah, literally anything can happen. I have not caught up with what's going on with the State Department and Rubio. I'll be so honest. There's so much to keep up with, but no, I mean, I think like sort of our regional approach is incredibly concerning, and I'm scared. I'm
writing a thing about Michael Anton, who's the director of policy planning.
Oh, yeah.
But he's very on the record about wanting a monarchy. And he's the intellectual in charge of the State Department,
Wow. Cool.
You know what kind of foreign policy monarchs do? Imperial foreign policy.
Yeah. Oh my God. All right. Well, on that note.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good one.
You too. Hang in there.
Take care of DC for me.
I will do my best.
All right. Peace.
Bye.